Welcome to this webinar on battery degradation, the realities and solutions. Just wanted to welcome you all. My name's Nathan Gore-Brown from Test EV. I'm a distributor for Avaloo. I'm going to try and remove the sales side of things and just focus particularly on the data and insights side of things around EV battery health. So battery life often takes the brunt of EV jokes, and that they all go to landfill and they're likely to last to the end of the week. And I'm sure we've all had Uncle Jim tell us that at the recent barbecue. This concept is often born out of experiences with mobile phones and maybe laptop batteries, or even the likes of first generation EVs like the Nissan Leaf, which has got a lot to answer for. But the reality of modern EVs is that their battery cells and the management of those cells is very different. And in today's webinar, we'll take a look through what's going on with battery degradation and health and how you can navigate it. So I wanted to start off with a background that there are so many perceived risks around the adoption of EV, and some of them are born out of battery health and battery life particularly. Things like operational range and capability of the vehicle is very much born out of battery health. If the battery health is poor, then you won't be able to go as far. Similarly, the total cost of ownership is driven somewhat by the residual value, and the residual value is driven, in the case of EVs, by how healthy that battery is. And in the most extreme of cases, the battery health, if there's a particular issue there, could result in an EV battery fire. So many of the challenges that exist in the transition to EVs all come from battery health and battery life. And we do have a clear understanding from the public that EV battery health is really important to their perception, particularly for used cars, second life, second user cars, and that a very high proportion of people have a concern about the cost, and also that they are going to have to be involved in the replacement of a battery, which is typically unlikely, but and warranty will cover it, but there's particular concerns there. So we know that the public has deep challenges, and more than 50% of people will not buy a used EV because they are concerned about battery health. So I wanted to take you right back into what are batteries, what are those cells, and how does it work? And what we've got here is an image of a cylindrical cell, the type that are used in Teslas. And batteries hold energy inside their chemically organized batteries, and dissimilar metals will hold energy. And lithium-ion batteries, which is what we have in different types across all of our EVs, all hold energy. And over time and use, their ability to hold energy does reduce somewhat. And this is often called degradation. And it's measured as a state of health. And that state of health is compared to the original battery's capability. So if it was originally 100 and now it's 90, it's lost 10% of its capability, and that's 10% of the energy that it could hold. And degradation occurs for a few different reasons. Particularly stress due to under or overcharge will particularly damage or degrade batteries. The electrolyte, this is kind of the liquid that holds it all together. It can also degrade chemically, and that will reduce the capacity to hold energy. The one that's most likely to be causing the reduction in batteries holding capability will be early life lithium deposits. So lithium transfers from one part of the battery to the other, covers up that other part of the battery, and it will then stop the transfer of as many ions, and so that will then reduce its ability to transfer energy. And in the long term, you might have heard of a thing called dendrites, and it's basically like stalagmites or stalactites that are driving between two plates, and they may come together in the middle, and that will cause a short, and that can often result in a cell failure. So those are the sorts of things that can happen over time, and the sorts of reasons for those are, as you see there, temperature stress, charging over and below. Also cells that are imbalanced. So that's like an electrical stress, and then also physical damage. But if we take that into a different approach and think about it in terms of our own state of health, if I think about my own state of health or yours, they're a combination of lots of different things which drive our healthiness, if you like. Everything from genetics through what we eat and drink, what we do with our time, how much stress we have, and the kind of environment we live in as well, if we're in hot or cold environments. That will impact the aging effects of our bodies. And batteries are somewhat similar to ourselves. If we think about batteries, there's clearly the design and manufacture, a bit like genetics, how they're made up. That will make a big impact to how the vehicle and its battery ages over time. But also the type of charging, it's a bit like the food. The type of driving behavior, that's kind of like the what we do and how we do it. Temperatures that are experienced, so things like preconditioning batteries before fast charging to then not provide temperature shocks. And then also things like how the battery is held state of charge for long periods of time. So if it's let to drop to 0% and let to stand for many months with no energy in it, that will typically damage batteries and degrade batteries as well. So all of these health factors, quite like humans, will drive the battery's state of health. So I've said before that state of health is typically measured as a percentage of the original battery's capability to hold energy. So if we think about this across many, many vehicles, Avaloo has been testing vehicles across the world for about 7 years now. And in that 7 years, we've done well over 250,000, 300,000 tests now. And here's an example of some information that was corroborated by a consulting firm that was looking at battery health and how the real world battery health compares to bench testing battery health. There's a few things going on here, so I'll quickly explain that. You can see the grey line here that sort of tails out towards the end and below 80% towards the end. That's the modelling that the consulting firm had seen from bench testing and laboratory cell testing. So that's what people typically think when they think about battery degradation. But the orange line shows an example of battery degradation across the data that Avaloo has found over time. An early degradation as the battery settles down and some of that plating occurs. And then over time, just a gentle reduction in battery health. And you can see here at 300,000 kilometres on these vehicles that are shown at the end of the graph here, that they're well above 80%. So there's a lot of vehicles out there performing quite well in the 80s and in the 90s, well into 200,000 and 300,000 kilometres. So that's real. The other thing that's real in this graph shows is that there are vehicles that have early life degradation that's greater than you would want. And all manufacturers offer a warranty at 70% state of health. So if the vehicle has had its battery degrade to beyond 70%, that will typically be a warranty conversation. And all EVs have at least an 8-year, 160,000 kilometre battery warranty. And so vehicles in this circle here would all be supported under warranty as an example. So we're seeing about 1 to 2% of vehicles exhibit some sort of rapid degradation issues. And that's why it's really important to have an understanding of the battery's health, particularly at used car sale and other times in that sort of mid part of a vehicle's life. So there's something else that's going on with batteries that we need to be really across as well. And that's battery cell balancing. So EV batteries are made up with hundreds typically of cells that are in series that are all joined together. And the energy that's in each of those batteries, the voltage of those batteries, all needs to be level, all needs to be consistent. And there's a widely recognized value of 90 millivolts as the consistent voltage across all of those cells. Now, the battery management system's job is to keep those battery cells at the very similar fine tolerance level, and we'll do that through the charging and discharging process to make sure that the cells are all kept as even as possible. The other function is that if we did have a battery that had greater than 90 millivolts battery cell voltage spread or delta, we would then have a challenge where it's a bit like a seesaw. We have one side of the seesaw's high, one side of the seesaw's low, and then it becomes quite hard for both parties to get to the other end of the spectrum and become more balanced. And so what we have is an imbalanced battery pack. That cell that's a bit lower is going to work harder. It's going to have more current come out of it because the voltage is lower. And then it's going to only further tip that balance. Ones that might be higher, they will also have themselves a situation where they'll probably end up drifting higher again. And we see this over time of an unmanaged imbalanced battery pack will then result in significant imbalance that's often challenging to right. And so an imbalanced cells in a pack can actually cause huge stress on those cells, will almost definitely result in rapid cell degradation of those that are, and in the worst and most significant situations can result in thermal runaway risk and vehicle faults, i.e. that the vehicle will just stop in the middle of driving and not be able to move forward because the critical cell that's super low will result in not being able to function anymore. And as it's in series, will typically shut the whole pack down. So you don't want to get to that point, and you can often catch that if the battery is checked regularly or when there is a concern. So if we think about the state of health and consumers wanting to know what the state of health is of their battery or the battery of the vehicle they're about to buy, it's important for them to work out where that source of information is going to come from. And we could rely on the OEM and the onboard self-checking of battery states of health and even the likes of battery cell balance that we just spoke of, and could be a way to go about it. But what we find is that there's no single agreed method for OEMs, manufacturers, vehicle manufacturers, original equipment manufacturers, that's what OEM stands for them to measure state of health. There are at least 4 different versions of this. And I won't go into that level of detail on this webinar today, but wanted to sort of provide that real insight that there's no consistency in this space. There's no legislation, there's no requirement as yet, either in Europe or elsewhere. And so manufacturers do what's right for them and they provide a result that's right for them. Another alternative for consumers and fleets and the like is to get independent diagnostic that will level out that information. Take what's on board of the vehicle, ask the vehicle more than just what its simple state of health is, and build that into a consistent method. And that's what Avaloo does. It takes the information from across the vehicle, particularly the battery management system, and it correlates that information. I'll talk a little bit more about how it does that in a few minutes. An example of this in practice is this data here is from one particular manufacturer, which we see a lot provide a result from the onboard information as being simply 100%. Right out to, in this case, 175 kilometers. So basically the warranty of the vehicle. Still saying that that vehicle is in the order of 100% battery health. And one of the things that's going on here is this manufacturer is using a technique. You said there was 4 there before. They're not only using a technique to manage their state of health, but they're also measuring the state of health into the buffer of the battery. EVs typically have areas of the battery energy storage that we can't get to as drivers. And if you measure the bit that you use, then that's probably a more sensible use of state of health, because it's what can I actually drive with, what is my range, as opposed to the manufacturer in this particular case providing the state of health, including the bit of the battery that we're not able to access. So Avaloo has taken the information and after hundreds of thousands of tests are able to correlate the data to say what is the true real world battery health and therefore range of the vehicle that we're looking at. And you can see here that the majority of these vehicles have a true battery state of health that's some 5 percentage points less than the vehicle has told us. And in the case of these lower points here, down towards 10% less than what the vehicle has told us. So we'd love to believe our colleagues from the manufacturers, but the reality is that the onboard computers are either not programmed to, clever enough, fast enough, or have the ability to properly measure the state of health over a period of time. It's not the case for all manufacturers. Almost every manufacturer and even some vehicles have a completely different approach. And so this is just one example of that extreme difference. If we consider that asking the vehicle what its state of health is, if we put that into medical terms, I think it's sometimes easier for us humans to understand what it means to ourselves. If we consider that state of health readout from the vehicle, we're really basically taking our temperature. We're taking the temperature. It's providing us a number, and it's probably also providing us a beep to say we're good or maybe we've got a fever. We don't have a doctor on hand to give us insight to whether or not we're actually really healthy or not. Is that number good? I know every time I use a thermometer, I rely on the beep to remember what is the right amount of temperature and when do I have a fever. And so this is what we're seeing if we're just taking the manufacturer's word for it. When we have a look at what Avalu's doing, it's a standardized test that sets the benchmark for all vehicles in the marketplace, not those manufacturers who are counting one part of the battery and not other. We're also taking over 24 different channels of information. That includes temperature, it includes voltages at each individual cell, it includes things like fast charging and slow charging basis, peak current, and the type of driving that's been achieved over time, and all those sorts of things. And we not only take those more than 24 channels of information, but we also take it many times through the 3-minute test program. And we take that information and we compare it to big data that we've got in the background. So we actually diagnose that information like a doctor's been looking at it. And at that point, we can provide a test that's much more rounded and much more information. Give you a bit of an example of where this really comes into its own. So this is an example of a Avalu test flash report where we found a problem. And in that problem, what we found here in the vehicle is that the battery management system says we're about a 90% vehicle. That's great, fantastic. But actually, what we've also found is that we have a massive cell imbalance. And if we go and do our longer test, our full battery test, which is known as a premium test, we run the vehicle from 100% to 10%. In this particular vehicle's case, we only had a 42% battery health, and that is mostly due to a failing cell. And so whilst the vehicle thought it was all healthy, and if you ask the vehicle, what is your state of health? I'm 90. Right, fantastic. We go down that next level of detail that Avalu does when it's doing the flash test. We found a cell imbalance and we found some other issues which result in a concerning report. And this does happen in about 1 to 2% of cases that we engage with. I'll give you another example of just that as well. Now, this is showing our new battery health certificate format. This is something that's going to come out from mid-June 2025, and you can see a little bit more detail being provided to the reader here. Again, we've identified a particular concern with the battery, and we've got our new benchmarking format here, but we can't benchmark this particular battery because it's faulty. We asked the vehicle how healthy it is, and it thinks it's 100%, which sounds fantastic. But as you can see down here on this heat map, we've got one cell that's 300 millivolts away from where it should be. And what you can see here now is in our new test report is we're showing a heat map of all of the cells that are in this particular model, and the balancing of those voltages. You can see that one cell being out of whack for where it needs to be. And we ran the long form test on this Kia EV6, and we found a 60% battery health. So significant degradation in the ability for that battery to provide energy. And I understand this particular vehicle did not have any warning codes or lights on as well. So these sorts of things can occur and be masked by the vehicle not saying that there's an issue, but there is actually an issue on board. In this case, a imbalanced cell creating challenges with the battery's ability to hold energy. So provide you a bit of an insight to the difference between just asking the vehicle how healthy it is and really going several layers deeper and comparing it to other vehicles to understand how healthy the vehicle really is and the battery really is. Why is this important? Well, particularly for fleets and heavy vehicles, there's a massive impact as well. The residual value of a vehicle impacts the total cost of ownership, and particularly in fleets, that's a major issue. So how much does the vehicle cost over the whole life of its use in a fleet is the major concern for fleet managers. And residual value makes up more of an element to the total cost than fuel or maintenance, particularly in the case of an EV, where fuel and maintenance is much less than an ICE vehicle. And so having clear battery health understanding will and does bring higher residual values. And that's what we've seen across Europe. And it obviously supports any warranty claims that may occur during the life of the vehicle if there was to be an issue. And obviously, EV trucks have a very similar challenge. Same degradation factors, same things that drive degradation happen in trucks and buses as they do in cars. And what we're seeing is as those markets grow, Avalu is moving towards trucks and understanding what behavior in truck batteries will be. And I see the growing need here in Australia over time for the ability to test electric trucks and electric buses and so on as that fleet grows. So I wanted to turn it over to you, those folks online here in the webinar, and see if you had any questions. If you haven't already, please feel free to drop some questions into the chat. So I've got that first question, and we are having a look at the EV battery health testing, and I'll just flick to a slide here which shows the tester and the test and so on. What is the price for a test? So the flash test is 175 Australian dollars, including GST, and it's available at several of our partners, not only from Test EV based here in Brisbane, but we have suppliers across the country as well. If you go to the Test EV website, you'll be able to see where some of those partners are, and they'll have a box just like pictured over here, and they'll be able to plug that into your vehicle and within about 5 or 10 minutes provide a report that looks like what we've seen here and give you that insight of what is the health of your battery. Whilst I'm waiting for other questions to pop up, I thought I'd provide a bit of background. Sometimes people think that EV batteries degrade particularly due to fast charging. That is maybe the case, but I'd also say that it's not consistently the case. I'll use an example of 2 early delivery Australian Tesla Model 3 Standard Range Plus vehicles. I own one and I've tested another. Both of those vehicles are now 6 years old. One vehicle has 90,000 kilometers on the clock after those 6 years, and the other had 190,000 kilometers on the clock. And that higher kilometer vehicle was also used as a rideshare vehicle through that period of time. So had significant amounts of fast charging compared to the vehicle that had the lower kilometers, which was mostly home charge on a wall box. Testing those 2 vehicles, very, very similar time together. The 90,000 kilometer vehicle got an Avaloo percentage of 84% battery health. And the one that had the higher kilometers had a test score of 83%. And so what you can see there is 2 vehicles, very similar age, very different use case that resulted in a very, very similar battery health. And so that's something that we see across a set of vehicles, and probably give you a bit of an insight that fast charging doesn't always result in higher battery degradation. Also, another example would be, how long do batteries last? And a gentleman who runs a fleet of, in this case, Tesla limo vehicles in Byron Bay, dropping people at airports and so on, lots of fast charging, lots of kilometers. His longest standing vehicle managed to achieve 666,000 kilometers on that Model S's battery. It's actually something that we see quite often. But for every time we've got somebody achieving some really high kilometers on a battery, which is fantastic to hear, we're also having those challenges where batteries are degrading early, or there's challenges around their cell balancing, having problems early life. So, it's important to test your vehicle so you know what's going on. I had one other question that popped up here, and that's around how can we be sure that the testing from Avaloo is independent. Avaloo has had its testing process be checked and verified by not only Germany's TÜV testing house, but also the used car peak body CARA as well. So widely tested in European markets and also now widely used by manufacturers across Europe. And now it's available in Australia and New Zealand. So if you are interested in understanding more about the Avaloo product and more about battery health, please do go to testev.co and you'll see more information about where to get testing in Australia. Well, thank you very much for joining us today at our webinar around battery health, the realities and the solutions that you have. Really great to see so many people engaged in the topic. Thank you very much. And please do keep checking your battery's health.